Good morning to you all. Hello also to anyone joining us internationally. Welcome to the AI and Public Libraries panel discussion, which is being brought to you by the State Library Victoria and Public Libraries Victoria as part of the Library's Future Ready program of work. My name is Jackie Horde. I'm the Senior Program Manager in the Library Sector Engagement Team at State Library Victoria. To kick things off, I'd like to do an acknowledgement to country on behalf of State Library Victoria. If you'd like to join in, please put your name, your library service, and the Aboriginal name of the country you're on in the chat so we can see the full breadth of attendees from across the state and elsewhere, and the lands from which they are attending or you are attending. State Library Victoria acknowledges the traditional lands of all the Victorian Aboriginal clans and their cultural practices and knowledge systems. We recognise that our collections hold traditional cultural knowledge belonging to Indigenous communities in Victoria and around the country. We support communities to protect the integrity of this information gathered from their ancestors in the colonial period. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, who have handed down these systems of practice to each new generation for millennia. So welcome, welcome to you all. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country here in Naarm. Those of you who were at the Public Libraries Victoria conference last year will remember that AI was a hot topic of discussion. In response to this interest, we have today's panel, which I hope will be the first in many discussions about the impact of AI on the library sector and on our communities. Our facilitator for today is Ben Kolaitis from City of Melbourne Libraries, who's currently the Acting Library Program and Partnerships Coordinator. With over 10 years of experience in developing meaningful technological initiatives and partnerships in libraries, Ben has supported the development of vibrant and inclusive spaces, programs and projects that have resonated with the community's need for technologies and digital literacy to support wellbeing. Ben is also a member of the Library's Future Ready Working Group. Before I hand over to Ben, I'd like to remind you that today's panel discussion is being recorded. The recording will be stored on our private YouTube channel and will only be available to people who receive the link. So Ben, take it away.
Hey, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. I will just warn you, this isn't a webinar Zoom, so please keep yourselves muted while we are going through this, and we'll be letting people in the background. But again, yes, it's going to be recorded as well. Yes, thanks everyone. I'm speaking to you from the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and also like to acknowledge and honour their unbroken spiritual and cultural political connection they have maintained to this unique place for more than 2,000 generations. This is going to be a really interesting panel. It is also a really interesting topic right now. It is a hot topic, of course, because everyone in every industry is talking about this right now. We're going to really dive into what's happening in this space around AI, but we're also going to really specifically talk about it from our industry as well. What does it mean for us? How is it going to change the society around us? And what things do we need to be aware of and prepare? And what are the issues that relate to it as well? Our expert panel here, we have the amazing Professor Lisa Given, who is the Director of Social Change Enabling Impact Platform, Professor of Information Sciences and Co-Director of the Centre for Human AI Information Environments at RMIT University here in Melbourne. Her interdisciplinary research in human information behaviour brings a critical social research lens to studies to technology use and user-focused design. A former president of the Association for Information Science and Technology, Professor Given is a fellow of the Academy of the Social Sciences in Australia, served on the Australian Research Council's College of Experts, editor-in-chief of the Annual Review of Information Science and Technology, and lead author of Looking for Information, examining research on how people engage with information. Thank you, Lisa, for coming along. It's really exciting to have your amazing professional knowledge here to talk through this as well. And then, of course, we also have the amazing Nick Tanzi. Nick Tanzi is the Assistant Director of the South Huntington Public Library in Suffolk County, New York. He is internationally recognized library technology consultant and author of the books Making the Most of Digital Collections Through Training and Outreach and Best Technologies for Public Libraries, Policies, Programs and Services. Nick is a past column editor for the public library magazines The Wired Library. His work has also been featured in many publications, including Computers in Libraries, Library Journal, American Libraries, and Marketing Library Services as well. You can also find more information about Nick at his blog, digital-librarian.com. And you can also see the information on the slide I'm sharing below too. So here we are. Thanks everyone for coming. So we are going to be starting off with some questions here. I'm going to be showing some quick clips to showcase some new things that are being developed right now in the AI space, and we will have some time at the end for questions too. So feel free. Jackie's going to be watching the chat and also going through, and we're going to try and get through as many as we can at the end. But thanks for joining us. So. Um, First, we're going to start with just this one clip here. It's going to be showcasing some of the accessibility benefits that are starting to come up, particularly in new models with ChatGPT, which is an omni model, which can parallel process, which means process at the same time text, sound, and it can also view video, and it can also look at screens as well. So the first one I'm going to show you here is someone who is vision impaired and how they could use and are using an AI model to help them understand the world around them and interact with it and also interface with it. So here we go.
Try and tell me exactly what they're doing right now, please.
Right now, the ducks are gently gliding across the water. They're moving in a fairly relaxed manner, not in a hurry. Occasionally, one of them will dip its head under the water, probably looking for food, and then pop back up.
I even know when a taxi is coming with its orange light on. I think I'll hail it to get home.
Yes.
And then the second one I'm going to show here is the same model. So these only got released about a month ago. They are going to be publicly available, I think, in a couple of months. They're still in the process of rolling it out. But this one here is using an AI model as a tutor. So this is a father and son here. They're currently doing some maths homework together, and the model itself, they've just enabled to be looking at the screen share on the iPad, and they're just having a conversation with it to support them with their tutoring and their homework together. So here's the other clip.
In this format,
hello there. I'm here with my son, and I'd love you to tutor him on this math problem, but don't give him the answer. You can ask questions and nudge him in the right direction, but I really want to make sure he understands it himself. And he's here in the room, so you can talk to him directly.
Of course, I'd be happy to help. Let's look at the problem together. Can you first identify which sides of the triangle are the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse relative to angle alpha?
All right, so I'm pretty sure this is the angle alpha right here, right?
Perfect. That's correct. Now, looking at the triangle, which side do you think is the hypotenuse?
Really,
Remember the hypotenuse?
I'm not totally sure. I think it might be this one, but I really am not sure. This side AC.
You're close. Actually, side AC is called the adjacent side to the angle alpha. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right triangle and is directly opposite the right angle. Can you find which one is the...
Here we go. So there's some really interesting new developments in that space here, and I wanted to start off first with you, Lisa. What do you believe is the role of a librarian or us in our industry in the library space in utilizing AI in our industry of information management and literacy support?
Thanks so much, Ben. And real pleasure to be here. I look forward to the discussion and people's questions in particular. I think this is a really exciting time for librarians and libraries generally, even though it may seem very daunting for many of us because we're having to run and try to keep up and even attempt to get ahead of what's happening in the sector. But I've often said to people, there's never been a better time for librarians because what's happening particularly around concerns of hallucinations with the information being provided. I'm seeing, for example, many people, general public, confusing something like ChatGPT with a search engine. It's a bit of a wild west out there at the minute. People are really kind of beta testing a lot of these tools, and yet they're so excited by them. They're entranced by them. They want to build them into their everyday lives or into their work practices, but they need a lot of guidance. So I see it as, all the things that we've always done in terms of helping people to navigate misinformation, helping them to find appropriate resources. All of that is now just at a larger scale, a little more complex, but we have to be in the thick of it.
Awesome. And I guess too, like leading from that too, like in terms of um, like our role or understanding where it's could be used in our space, do you see any particular areas that you think we should prioritize, at least in terms of understanding in this AI space?
I think the critical task number one is likely going to be professional development for most of our librarians. Even myself, we all struggle to just keep up with what are these new tools, what's the functionality, and also trying to distinguish the hype from the reality. So even, many of the kinds of clips that you will see on YouTube are sometimes from the designers of these. They're sometimes talking about speculative futures rather than what the tool can actually do in the moment. So I think if we're prioritizing anything in libraries, it should first be professional development and support for staff. And in parallel to that, it's the on the ground, I think, work that we do through reference service with our everyday clients to be helping them to be critical about these technologies and asking questions about them. So if all that we do is that kind of critical information literacy work and some PD in the next kind of 12 months, I think we're going to be starting out quite well.
Nick, over to you too. Like, what's your reflection on that? Where do you see our roles
Sure.
and this sort of development too?
Well, first off, it's great to hear everything that Lisa is saying. You never know when there's another speaker, like, are we going to be at odds? But no, right now she's preaching. And, typically I always look at a new emerging technology and I look at the library's role in digital equity. And AI is an interesting one because typically there's a new technology and it's prohibitively expensive and it's an access issue. But in the case of AI, the problem is that there's wide access, but no understanding of the technology. And that's dangerous. So that's really the priority, is to both educate ourselves and then quickly make that pivot to teach AI literacy to others. One of the immediate things, we mentioned professional development, and kind of side by side with that has to be policy. There's no regulatory environment to speak of right now, but we can make some guardrails and an ethical framework that I think is important just to, as we train staff, we have to train them in use cases and what's appropriate and what's not. And from, an information management standpoint, we need to update our reference interview because now you're almost going to be conducting two interviews. We're going to be talking to a person, and that reference interview, open-ended questions are important. I want to be approachable, and I have to coax the question out of the person. But then if I'm going to use generative AI, I'm going to engage with an LLM, a large language model. I don't want to be asking it open-ended questions because I'm more likely to produce an AI hallucination. It's going to make something up. I have to use a different approach. One of the ones I recommend looking at is Leo Lowe's the CLEAR framework, concise, logical, explicit, adaptive, reflective, because you'll produce better results. So that's one of the fundamentals, the reference interview now that we have to conduct too, if we're going to be engaging with AI, the human one, and then, the one with the artificial intelligence, and two very different approaches.
Yeah, I think that's a really good leading point too here, because the one thing I hear from both of you is what is real seems to be a thing that's coming up, and the role of us to understand and at least be that point of determining and supporting people with understanding what's real and what's not, particularly around hallucinations. We are in a media generation. Everyone is predominantly experiencing the world through the lens of a screen. And now we have these new technologies that can create whatever we want. Well, or at least as try to in these sort of digital
described
spaces.
as the, I apologize, but I've heard it described as the era of code your own reality.
Yeah.
So that's concerning.
So I'm going to show another clip here to lead us through into the next part, but it's really going to showcase this element of it, which is Sora is a model also going to be released by OpenAI. There's also been a couple of text to video platforms recently coming out too. One of them's Dream Machine as well. So those who don't know this, I'm sure everyone's aware of text to image. So you type in a prompt, you say what you want to see, and it will give you an image. This is the next step from there. So it's popping in a text and then producing a video based on what you write. The current capabilities of these are still pretty limited. They can only pump out 720p so far for a lot of these models. And in terms of the length of how much you can see is anywhere between 4 seconds to about 30 seconds where these models are starting to go. But going to the down to the heart of it is now that we're in a media generation, what we see doesn't necessarily mean we can believe, no matter how realistic it looks. So I'm going to start here with this short clip showing a beautiful snowy Tokyo city is bustling. The camera moves through the bustling city street, following several people enjoying beautiful snowy weather and shopping at nearby stalls. Gorgeous sakura petals are flying through the wind along with snowflakes. So let's just see what these sorts of models can produce. So those that play with these, you can probably notice a few interesting artifacts in there, but you can see how these things can generate these very, very professional looking, realistic looking, almost cinematic looking videos quite quickly, just from text as well.
Anaya, you want?
Cool. And then the next one I'm going to show here is also recently Apple has just announced a new development called, new product update to the new iPhones and iPads with a thing called Apple Intelligence. So this is partially their own model that they've created, and it's also partially a one that they've been working with OpenAI on as well. But those who are unaware, this is going to be coming to people's phones in the next couple of months or so, particularly if you've got the new iPhone Pros and all of that. The thing I wanted to highlight here is this next step of interaction with personal devices. I'm sure many of us in the library industry understand and have had experience working with people who are having issues with their phone or trying to figure out how to utilize their phone. But the one I wanted to highlight here is this personal context element that's going to be coming through. So the bit to note here is and also from a data point of view, it's going to be looking at people's phones across multiple apps and all the information that surrounds a person and try and find ways to make it so that the way you interact with your phone is more natural, both for good and for bad, but it's worth at least showcasing this. So I'll just play this clip quickly.
Next, personal context draws from your photos, calendar events, messages, and other apps. So let's say your mom is coming to visit. Simply ask,
Siri, when is Mom's flight landing?
And Siri already knows who Mom is and will cross-reference flight details from an email to give you an up-to-date arrival time. And if you've forgotten what plans you have, you can say,
What's our dinner plan?
And Siri knows you mean you and your mom and will find that information in a text she sent you. And if you don't want to ask Siri out loud.
So yeah, that's both of those things are new interesting developments that are coming through. I wanted to pop back over to you, Nick, particularly around these sorts of things, around media creation. You mentioned some of the stuff around literacy and stuff. What do you think are our opportunity in the library space for us to be able to lead within understanding AI and leading within the industry around being able to work with this stuff?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things we've always done is help reskill folks, particularly around the job market. And we've seen with past innovation, something like the internet popping up, it disrupted a lot of jobs. There's questions about how much, AI is a replacement for some jobs, but we know that it's certainly a disruptive, technology that's going to have displacement and people are going to need to reskill. So I think that's a core thing we'll need to navigate our community through when they're saying 1 in 4 jobs potentially is disrupted. And we have a history of, kind of scaling up ourselves and then skilling up others. So that's certainly important. The other thing is, and we'll talk ethics, I know, a little bit later, but there is a real opportunity as a library to articulate an ethical vision of AI, to be clear about what its problems are, what its limitations are, and then explain how our own use or how we use it within our organizations can be ethical and provide that ethical alternative, to for example, LLMs that are less hallucinatory, where we respect an individual's privacy, more akin to a glass box AI than a black box AI, have that transparency where you can have it. Because that distinction, privacy is going to be at a premium going forward, just looking at your phone and when it's going to be taken from you there. So I think that is super important. We can also lead because we saw that in the pandemic, and I'm speaking from, I guess, my American perspective here, but all of a sudden, when everybody needed to go on Zoom and take classes remotely, the government kind of rediscovered that, hey, like not everybody has access to the internet. And we were seen, once again, as partners in digital equity. So we have those connections. And I think that as governments really need to figure this thing out in this disruptive element, we are natural partners with a history of cooperation. And that's a way we can lead as well. So it requires our engagement with this technology early so we can speak authoritatively about it and then be seen as partners and have a seat at that table.
I find it interesting too, because I really find it interesting, like being able to draw parallels to the boom of the internet and its disruption on our industry, which was significant. A lot of libraries now are still, we've got public PCs, free Wi-Fi, digital literacy, digital inclusion are really, really big hot topics and have been for quite a while. In that, I guess, is there anything that you think that the library industry should have learned or has learned from how we went about integrating and working with the new internet generation, and how you think that relates to our way of now knowing or learning how to navigate the AI space?
Yeah, well, I think that we have a history of successfully navigating technological change. And I often point to the internet as an example of that because it's impacting so many of the same things, the information landscape, copyright questions, all of those things, job disruption. So it is a good parallel. But there's a French cultural theorist, Paul, I'm forgetting his last name, shame on me. But he says, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. And so we know that even in a positive development, there's bad things that come out of it. And when we look at the internet, it increased democratization of information. More people had access to information, but not necessarily the quality of information. And we should expect that same thing. There's more information out there than ever before. It's more accessible, but the quality is often dubious. And during the internet, you were a savvy consumer if you went to .edus and .govs. We can imagine how much more complex it's going to be. So that's the thing, that don't underestimate the problem of disinformation, misinformation, media literacy that we're going to be facing.
Lisa, I guess the same goes to you too. Like, do you see a particular area where us as librarians and the library world, like where you think it's really important for us to be able to lead conversations or at least activities and outcomes in this space?
Absolutely. And that's why I keep saying there's never been a better time to be a librarian, right? But I think we do have to be proactive. I think one of the areas that we can really be leading is actually around the concept of what should those guardrails be and how do we develop actually appropriate policy, not just within our libraries. Like I think we need to do that ourselves internally, but there are so many business organizations, schools, individual groups trying to grapple with exactly these challenges. And one of our great strengths is that we're able to very quickly look to what is the state of the art? What are the policy imperatives? What are things that are happening globally that we can then perhaps translate for our local communities? So many people need help understanding not just the technology, but the regulatory environment. So even issues of, say, copyright, that gets it's always been complicated by different countries' laws. But now again, we're talking about greater scale, more complexity. And we're talking about things that previously have been in tidy little boxes. We have copyright law, we thought that covered us. Then along comes OpenAI and people asking questions, or Midjourney, or whatever the software might be, saying, where are the data sets coming from? How do we know what's in there? What is this thing. And so this landscape is now so complex. But I think that's where if we can actually lead and help people to say, here are some of the do's and don'ts, here are some of the things to be mindful of, this is really our time to shine. And I love that question of, what have we learned, or should we have learned about the internet that we can apply here? I think if I think back to the early days, and I'm dating myself, now, but if I think back to those early days, for many people, the internet was about coming still to the library because they may not have even had the computing facilities. They needed the library. Increasingly, of course, things have moved into the home, and people, as much as we talk about things like the reference interview, et cetera, that presumes people are still coming to us. I think a great question for us is going to be, how can we put ourselves in front of people as those trusted advisors that they might not think about because they're trusting Siri? But also, how can we actually think about what might be lost? So one of the great benefits in early internet days was it was librarians that said, wait a minute, we need to archive some of this work. We need to capture some of this. I think there's also that kind of meta level work around, these mechanisms are changing, they're adapting, they're getting better and better, but we probably need to be actually preparing to tell the story of this 20 years from now.
Well, I find that interesting, like the concept of AI archiving in a way almost, where trying to look at, how do we, I don't know, there might be a day where, someone's got to go through the archiving of the data sets that related to 3.5, which then might be a regulatory need that we've got to be involved in. Do you think something like that could come about?
That's really what I'm thinking. We're on the cusp of something here. And I even look at, and I kind of kick myself that I didn't take some screenshots of some of those early chat GPTs from a year ago. What was the company putting in front of people in terms of warning signs and caveats? And where are we now in terms of, are they putting different caveats? What are some of the pieces that they're listing? How is the policy space changing? I also just think, hey, if anybody wants to, think about PhD, many librarians often are, but this is a lovely space if you're thinking about going back and actually doing some research around all of this.
Yeah, I find that interesting too, because like both of you are talking about the importance and the role of regulation. What's our role in terms of advocacy? What's also our role in terms of supporting researchers for them to be able to put forward ideas and be able to research the things that we can provide them and say, hey, here's an old archive model. Can you see the problems from back then? Can you see how those problems are still now? I guess bringing it also to from a public library setting there, Lisa, you were saying before about the difference between the internet where, it was more of an infrastructure issue where people would come to us because they didn't have a connection to a device or necessarily to the actual like phone lines and things like that, or couldn't afford it back then. But now it's becoming ubiquitous in, everyone's hands and devices and screens and more at home. Is there anything in that you see that for us to be aware of around how we can make sure that we are there in front of people, supporting them with them? Particularly there is that tension of them being able to just do it at home.
Yeah, I think this has been an ongoing challenge for us in our sector for decades of the notion that we do our job so well, we're a bit invisible at times, or people maybe don't think of us on the front lines. And I think part of that is making sure that we're actually at the table around some of the decisions that might be taken, whether it's say at a city council meeting or, there's lots of people talking about deployment of tools. And I think librarians need to insert themselves and same as, here in the university, we're talking about this exact issue now, and librarians are deeply embedded, as are other of our professionals that have extreme expertise. But many people still turn to, we need to talk to some computer scientists about this. And I think we're still kind of battling that to some degree, but we are, definitely expert in all of these issues we've just been rattling off already today around copyright legislation, understanding data sets. We know the technology and we know the regulation, and we know how human beings need and seek information at the other end. So we're one of the very few disciplines, perhaps the only discipline and field of work that really understands the end-to-end practices that are going to inform this moving forward. And I think we just need to be upfront and loud and proud and talking about what we can bring to the table.
Well, there's definitely a lot of loud and proud librarians in the world, which I'm grateful for too.
Yeah.
I guess before we start jumping deeper into these ethical and data issues, Nick, I wanted to throw over to you, like, one thing that I have noticed, particularly on your blog and things, that you have also showcased areas where public libraries are now actually being front and center to work with people around navigating AI. Are there any particular areas or things that you've seen or uncovered that you think are really interesting use cases where librarians are using and supporting this sort of stuff now?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so much of it is because we tend to think ahead when we're confronted with a technology that is moving as fast as AI is. But the aha moments are really that early engagement with folks, just getting it in front of them in a space where they feel safe, they can safely experiment. When you show somebody how quickly Midjourney can make very passable disinformation, like you show them, what a deep fake looks like, you show them, even effective use of something like ChatGPT, you look like a magician because they've never seen anything like that. And they need to understand the capabilities, both, so they can use it personally, perhaps, or so when they're confronted with a piece of misinformation, disinformation, and, we're approaching an election in the United States, and it is a source of anxiety for a lot of people. Everybody wants to be a critical consumer of information. Pew Research consistently finds that people know it's a problem. They tend to think it's somebody else's problem, but that is a real source of anxiety. And just having a basis of reality, I think, is a nice starting point. And that really is, for me, is the front line, is just showing folks how to be a little more media savvy. And it's not always, new things. I mean, just traditional media literacy, basic digital sleuthing, like a reverse image search, still goes a long ways when folks encounter something that they're highly suspicious of.
I think that's a good starting point too for us to talk about now, leading into how this misinformation is happening, but also what's happening to our data as well. So I'm just going to do another screen share for everybody and show a couple of things that come up. So us here in Australia, if you are unaware, we are actually Meta, who runs both Facebook and Instagram, of course, Mark Zuckerberg, has recently announced that they're going to be doing a huge data scrape, I think all the way back to 2007, of all of the public information that is on their platforms. And us here in Australia, we have no opt-out. So I'll just showcase this quick news article on it.
Facebook and Instagram are coming for your data. They want it to train their artificial intelligence, and if you don't agree, well then too bad. You can't say no.
If you're one of the roughly 19 million Australians who use Facebook, there's a new policy coming for you.
Can you hear me okay?
It means that on June 26, Meta will take its Facebook and Instagram users' data from as far back as 2007 and feed it into their hungry AI learning machine to better train it to power chatbots and image generators and whatever the hell else AI does.
And this is just the beginning.
Regardless of whether your account is public or private, Meta will be taking your posts, photos, captions and any messages you've sent to its chatbot. Oh, and if you're not really okay with it, suffering your jocks.
Classic Australian saying right there. And then the next thing
I always enjoy learning new slang. I just want to say.
Yeah, we've got the best slang in the world, I reckon. Then the other part that's going to talk about this too is those, of course, the idea of cloning or digital cloning. So of course, AI models are really good at being able to learn patterns. Machine learning inherently is about pattern recognition. So there's a couple of things that are popping up in this space. One is with literally, I think about like less than 30 seconds worth of listening to a voice, AI platforms, which are publicly available already, can actually clone someone's voice. I think at the moment, also, there are some concerns around Scarlett Johansson is, I think, looking at trying to sue OpenAI because there was an issue around whether or not one of their inbuilt voices for their ChatGPT was actually her voice, which is really interesting. And the other thing to note too is like the text to image from text to video, these capabilities are also likely going to move into the video and the image space more and more too. So this is just a starting point. So why does this matter? Of course, many of us also deal in digital literacy, and one of the biggest issues in the digital literacy space is scamming. So I'm sure many of you have looked at digital safety tools, online safety tools, all of those things. They're hot topics and have been for as far as I can remember the internet being around, and even going way back to mail scamming and things like that too. But now we are looking right down the barrel in terms of a future where you don't know if the person you're talking to is a real person or not. There's even been a few interesting articles lately where there's a bunch of researchers trying to also test the Turing test on some of these new models, and more, particularly just the recent ChatGPT 4 model had, I think they were looking at a 54% rate in their study where people couldn't tell the difference between it being a robot or a human, and then the actual humans only had a 64% success rate of them determining if the human was a real human or not too. So here, I'll just sort of show this article, but this is talking about how scammers can utilize these tools that are actually freely available and easy to use as well.
Jennifer DeStefano will never forget the frantic call she got from her 15-year-old daughter, Brianna.
And she goes, "Mom, these bad men have me, help me, help me, help me." And this man gets on, very aggressive. "Listen here, I had your daughter." And then that's when I went into panic mode.
The man demanded $1 million.
I said that wasn't possible. So then he came up with a $50,000.
She never paid the money and would soon learn the call was a popular AI scam. New software can recreate the voices of loved ones in distress, and scammers use that to ask for large sums of money.
This man comes on the phone. He said, "You're going to give me $5,000.
I heard our daughter on the phone. Like, it was unmistakably her.
Americans lost nearly $9 billion to fraud last year alone, up more than 150% in just.
So just as that was a sort of good starting point there. Lisa, I really want to throw this to start with you. You spoke a little bit about it before, but particularly you've done a lot of research around looking at like what are design issues and the ethics that surround this. I guess, could you unpack a little bit more stuff around like, where are these areas of, complete destruction that are facing us, but particularly also talking about it more from a lens of what do we need to know as librarians to support the development of safety tools and digital literacy safety tools for the people we work with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a huge topic. It's absolutely fast moving, and the technology is improving rapidly. To give you an example, I've been talking to some folks in the banking sector, for example, who are, of course, on the front line of dealing with scammers and attempting to protect their clients from giving money to random people that would try to scam them out of cash. They also are really struggling with this, and partly again, it's because the workforce now needs to really ramp up in terms of even combating what are some of the scams coming at them. This is really a point where I think what starts to break down for us is that we cannot think that this is purely about, oh, we just need to train people, we just need to provide enough information literacy skills and everyone will be okay. I think this is also where we need deep regulation on the part of our governments to be on the front line in managing this at source. I think that for us, certainly when I think of library and information science as a sector, we are a powerful lobbying body, especially through groups like ALIA and the American Library Association. I think we, again, need to be really on the front line of working with government, not just to call for changes, but perhaps to help them to navigate and understand these complexities, because many people in government don't understand the technology, and they're sometimes believing the hype and worrying, and we have the media putting things out. There's no doubt that something like voice cloning is a potential. But again, that's currently a very small percentage of the population who would even be able to do that. But these are the headline grabbing stories. What we're seeing here in Australia, just by way of an example around social media, right? Recent bans of young children from social media is what the government's been talking about. And I think we have to be really careful about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and not saying, okay, the solution is we're all just going to come off of social media before Gen AI tools steal all of our data. This is actually something that can become more insidious. You know, we're starting to see AI tools embedded into, say, Office 365. It could potentially become just part of our regular workday, even without us knowing that it's in behind the scenes. So I think I always say, you know, horses somewhat left the barn, but I think we have to really work closely with government to start to map out where should transparency be demanded, what are some of the technology tools that perhaps we even need to say, no, we're not going to stand for the use of that. So, for example, you know, bans on deepfake technology, expectations around transparency, and real penalties for people that are attempting to scam others is really critical.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point there too. We'll touch on it a bit in the next question as well. But yeah, the role of ubiquitous technology is an interesting one, particularly in a world of no regulation in this space right now. Nick, over to you. I guess too, like bringing it to home as well, like us as librarians, like what really is that digital safety tool that is important for us to at least think about and start developing? Because it sounds like no one else is going to, essentially.
Yeah, well, I think oftentimes the solutions end up being people powered. You know, always looking for an AI tool to fix an AI problem, and it doesn't really work that way. You know, we traditionally taught digital privacy, and I think that's extremely important because some of the videos that you showed, I think, demonstrate that what it means to be a public figure has changed. You know, there's lots of video and audio of all of us. There's lots of images of all of us. That data is already there. We already qualify as public figures with regards to, you know, you have all the information you need to make an effective deepfake of somebody. So that's already out there. You know, it shocks me, Lisa, that you don't believe self-regulation works. I'm joking with companies, but it is important that we collectively, you know, negotiate, because all you can expect a company to do is try to make money. We're fooling ourselves if we think that there's any other motivator other than money. And everybody's floating trial balloons right now, right? You'll see like Zoom very quickly wanted to harvest a bunch of data. You see publishers that want to use AI generated covers, and they quickly back off if enough people express outrage, because if it's going to affect the bottom line, they're going to back off. So that's where libraries are well positioned in some spaces when your database companies come to you with a solution to also, you know, to kind of hit this, you know, to push back. So we have an ability to shape, but it does require collective action, and it does require that we collectively determine what is ethical or not within the librarianship and AI. So we can speak, the closer we are to speaking as one, the more influence we can kind of exert on the industry.
So we're coming to a close, everyone. Please pop questions into chat. Jackie and I will just be monitoring them. I will just sort of lead in while we're waiting for questions to come through. I am curious about this idea. So there's a little bit of discussion around the ubiquitous elements of what it means being everywhere and everything. And, you know, the classic saying of a lot of the tech industry will move fast and break things and then wait for regulation to force them to deal with it later on. Nick, I guess in terms of this ubiquitous use of where it's going, and you touched a little bit on it in terms of how it's going to affect maybe like library management systems and things like that too. Lisa, you touched a little bit on it in terms of it being rolled out through Microsoft Office 365, which many of us in the industry, you know, in professional industries are all forced to use whether we like it or not as well. Nick, I guess when it comes to understanding ubiquitous rollouts of these things, is there anything that we can do to understand how we will engage in these tools both from a PD point of view, so professional development point of view, but also being aware of what these tools mean, like from a self-education point of view, like where should we start first, and how far down the rabbit hole should we go?
Sure. So, it can be intimidating, right? Because we're trying to position ourselves to teach other people when we're learning at the same time. But a couple of things, one of which is I imagine everybody listening right now is either considers themselves an iPhone expert or an Android expert, right? And they got that way because it's what they have in their hand and it's what they engaged with. So we need to really lean on experiential learning, see with our eyes, touch with our hands. So we've been focusing at the South Huntington Public Library on the staff user group. And we just put a different tool in front of us and we play with it and we give ourselves homework assignments. We see what it does well and what it doesn't do well. And we learn that way. The other thing is all of these ecosystems, they want us to use them, right? Like, Google wants you in Google Workspace using all their tools. Microsoft wants you using their tools. And as these ecosystems develop, you don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of training because, like there's Grow with Google has the curriculum on how to use the tool. You just need to take your professional expertise and add it to the mix. But all these ecosystems already have that training material. So it's some combination of experiential learning, the way we all have maker spaces because we value that type of learning, getting in front of ourselves. And then leaning on so much of the curriculum that already exists, I think does go a very long way. The tricky part, of course, is the balancing act between privacy and convenience, because our users are informed by their experience in the private sector. So they're going to want the catalog search to be like, when they use Amazon or what Amazon looks like in the future, and vice versa. And we need to make sure that we're not throwing away professional ethics, that we're staying away from some of these third rails.
And Lisa, like what does it look like for us? How do we engage in this in a way that you think will really support us in terms of professional development?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing, and the reason that I raise Office 365 is because it is so ubiquitous. We don't even question that everyone has that on their desktop anymore. But what we've been doing here at our university, for example, is running a pilot with Copilot in order to understand, is this even a tool we want as an organization? And through the pilot work, I was chatting with a colleague of mine the other day, and he was playing with it and trying to see can we break the system? Could he see some things of mine? Because we don't even understand as people who are employed by this institution, what data does it have access to? And as a researcher, there are certain pieces of data and different types of communication that I do not want anyone else seeing. And he was able to pull things that I was kind of going, ooh, wait a minute, where did that come from? Someone might have uploaded a report to some centralized, shared space that I didn't realize that they had put. So I think pilot testing is really critical, trying to break our systems so that we understand better how they work so that we can then advise other people is really good. We've also created a community of practice. So we have an AI network that we put together, which is a mix of academics, professional staff, there's some HDR students, there's just a group, whomever that was really keen to start to do a sharing of knowledge. So we're not all reinventing the wheel. And I think that notion of that collective expertise is really important. And thirdly, I would really encourage people in the sector to reach out to folks like myself who are doing research in these areas, because, we're happy to partner with you. There may be different kinds of things that we can help to explore on a larger scale or bring you some expertise from other places where we've already been doing some research that can inform practice. So I've long been an advocate for building those links between universities and libraries on the ground. And here's another area we can do that.
And that also leads
quick,
into...
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Just in terms of, so when we talk curriculum though too, I mean, they're typically with, so much kind of unsettled, there is both a legal and ethical framework that you can look to. The legal one tends to be privacy law more than anything that impacts us. We have things like the confidentiality of patron records that we, tends to be a guiding star. And then their ethical framework, at least in the United States, is the Library Bill of Rights. And that's kind of that first stress test when we're thinking about a use case or a tool as we train staff.
I guess that leads on to two for you, Lisa Lake, and this is going to Anna Cullen's question too. That here is we as a council in our library service have been grappling with the governance side of AI and what it means to data privacy, guidelines for staff, all of those sorts of things. We've not seen strong policy yet for us to base, work on this sort of space. Is there anything in the Australian context that, like Nick was talking about, that could relate to us here in the Australian context around policies or guidelines or laws that we can look to?
Oh, we are way behind. You're not finding it because it doesn't yet really exist. I think this is part of the challenge. Even federally, we know that, we're seeing other governments in Europe, for example, who are way ahead of this. And our government is kind of taking a very cautious approach and putting together, we've got an advisory group that's doing some work. And later this year, we'll hear from them. Sorry for the cynicism in my voice, but this is such a fast moving space. So what's actually happening is little mini policies internal to organizations are starting to pop up. But what are those being informed by? I think people are just grabbing what they can and kind of saying, oh, here's what Italy's doing. That looks good. Let me pull that in. So I've been trying to kind of gather together a lot of these documents. I've done a little bit of work writing for The Conversation, talking to different journalists, trying to help them to see the complexities of this from the Australian perspective. But we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I do note, I've been following CSIRO for in terms of their work around this space, and they've been trying to pull together panels and calls for submissions and things like that too. But even they're still figuring it out, last I've seen, and they're still trying to release, where that is too. It's a very slow uptake.
And if I can, reinforce, people are not thinking about this from the user perspective, which is where our expertise lies. So even the bodies that are starting to grapple with this are really looking at it in terms of, say, legal frameworks. They're talking to the computer experts, but it's really the human component that I've really been thinking about deeply, because that's where the rubber is going to hit the road for our own users in libraries, and people are not coming at it from that perspective. So that's why they need us at the table.
I'm going to quickly mash together two questions here. So one question is from Ryan around, we have customers that approach us wanting to return their library items as they refuse to use the chutes or the self-checkouts, as they think it's taking library jobs, even though having those machines operating allows us to focus on lifelong learning and other opportunities. And looking, are there tips or advice that we can use to reassure people where there is appropriate use of technology around that? And I'm also going to lead into connecting that to Emily's question too. So, we obviously advocate for privacy and protection of our patrons. The Australian government attempts to regulate social media platforms as highlighted. What is our role in terms of looking at the privacy rights of citizens? So I guess I really want to I'll go back to you, Nick. Are there elements here that we can use to reassure, patrons where there is benefits to them, like you saw with the accessibility stuff?
So I guess what I would start with is AI is a bunch of challenges rolled in one. And one of them is going to be a communication challenge for libraries. We have to decide how we're engaging with this technology and then be transparent with the public, right? We need to communicate why libraries are still, necessary in the age of AI, why things that we offer, privacy, accuracy, are at a premium in the age of AI. And, as was alluded in this question too, is that we've always had to serve two very different patron types, right? Those transactional, virtual, would prefer maybe not to ever come in the building. And those folks who want to come to the circ desk, want to talk your ear off, want that human connection. And we know that there's an increase in social isolation. So we need to lean into, I think, those things that require the personal touch and be more, obvious about that and engage more and do more outreach. And then also make sure that in the digital age, that invisible labor is communicated to people, that ebooks don't just exist, we have to pay for these things, that these virtual services have people behind them. So it's not necessarily a new challenge, but it's one that's exacerbated by artificial intelligence.
I guess to Lisa, I will go back to more of this role of, and we've spoken a lot about regulation and things, and trying to bring it home more from an Australian context. Is there any particular avenue that's really strong for us as librarians to play a part of the regulatory landscape element of this? Like, is there ways for us to be able to get out there and lobby, and what does that look like in the Australian context for us, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key pieces is actually opening up people to what is happening overseas. So I find, often we do kind of look at what's happening on our own corners of the world here in Australia without actually understanding that we're not the only ones battling this problem. And in fact, we do know that there are effective measures and effective guidance for government. They're just unaware of it. So I think actually educating and being at, city council meetings and talking to different groups in our communities about, even things like GDPR. We may be very well across that, but for the average person here, they may not understand what GDPR provides to European citizens in terms of some of those data protections. And in fact, we've seen something like GDPR be a really useful stopper for some of these very intrusive decisions that big tech has been trying to impose on people. So we do have models where we can show that it's done. I find here in Australia, I think there's often a feeling like, well, here we go again, it's just coming, or the solution is to get off Facebook, if we see something like the story on the project, right? But that's a simplistic solution. That's not going to cut it. We're just starting to see tip of the iceberg. And I think there's definitely, there's a strong grassroots willingness in Australians. We like to kind of, we want to be battlers. We actually want to kind of see where we can force change. And I think we can be on the front of this.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa. Well, that is a close to this panel discussion. Of course, I'm sure all of us could talk for hours on end in this space anyway. But that being said, if people want more information, Professor Lisa Given is very much out and about at RMIT doing amazing space here. It's literally Google search away. You can probably even ask AI about Lisa if you need to. And highly recommend reaching out to Lisa, like she said before, if any of you are looking at those challenges around guidelines, policy, and research too. And also, thank you so much, Nick. Again, your blog and the research you do and what you're doing in America and showcasing these new spaces and new technologies and new frontiers for us in the library have been amazing. So thank you both so much.
I appreciate it. It was great learning from you, Lisa. And now I have some new slang I'm going to unleash tomorrow at work. So
yes, up here in your job.
It's exciting.
Yes.
And thanks for all of your work on blogging around all of this, Nick. I really appreciate reading about your stuff too.
Oh, thank you.
Amazing. Well, yes, thank you, everyone. And yeah, feel free to head on out. Again, as Jackie said before, this will be recorded and will be sent out via the private YouTube channel for State Library of Victoria. Thank you and have a lovely day.